Marvin Gaye, a soul icon whose voice shaped more than 25 years of music history, was gone in a single gunshot, his life ending in Los Angeles after a career that helped define Motown from its birth to the 1980s. Years earlier, in 1976, Florence Ballard's torment ended quietly with a sudden heart attack, sending a devastated Diana Ross back to Detroit for a funeral heavy with grief. Detroit was once sacred ground, the birthplace of voices so powerful they made the world listen. Motown rose as a beacon of hope, a dream where black artists could finally be heard. But behind the timeless songs and radiant smiles, whispers began to grow. One by one, stars who left Motown met tragic, lonely, or mysterious ends, young deaths, silent suffering, disappearances with no clear answers. 8 souls, 8 shattered fates. Was it coincidence? Or did something darker follow those who dared to walk away from music's most powerful empire? Tammi Terrell. Tammi Terrell, the angel who never woke up. If there was one moment that seemed to crack the perfect dream called Motown, it happened beneath blinding stage lights in Virginia in 1967. In the middle of a love song, one of the label's softest voices suddenly went silent. From that night on, many believed Detroit lost its purest soul, and that a quiet darkness began to creep through Motown's golden world. Tammi Terrell came from Philadelphia, a city soaked in rhythm and soul. When she walked into Motown headquarters in 1965, she was barely 20 years old. She carried something rare in the music industry: innocence. Her smile was effortless, her laugh genuine, her presence warm. Berry Gordy saw it immediately. To him, Tammi was the embodiment of Motown's promise, a young black woman whose voice could sell hope, romance, and possibility to the world. Fate soon placed her beside Marvin Gaye. Together they became the sound of love itself. Their voices blended with an ease that felt almost supernatural. Songs like Ain't No Mountain High Enough, Your Precious Love, and You're All I Need to Get By didn't just climb charts. They settled into people's lives. On stage, Tammi and Marvin smiled like nothing could ever touch them, like the world beyond the spotlight simply didn't exist. But behind the perfection, Tammi was slowly breaking. Before fame fully wrapped its arms around her, she had fallen deeply in love with David Ruffin of the Temptations. He was magnetic, talented, and dangerously unstable. What began as passion turned into fear. Friends later recalled seeing Tammi arrive with bruises hidden under makeup, sometimes with swollen eyes or broken bones explained away in whispers. When she discovered Ruffin had a wife and children, the emotional shock was devastating. Soon after, the headaches began, sharp, relentless pain that left her dizzy and exhausted. At Motown, pain was inconvenient. Image came first. Tammi was expected to keep smiling, keep performing, keep selling the fantasy. Her suffering didn't fit the narrative, so it was ignored. She was still pushed onto stages, still posed beside Marvin Gaye as Motown's dream girl, still told to smile through it all. Then came the night everything changed. On October 14, 1967, during a concert in Virginia, Tammi and Marvin were performing Your Precious Love. As the song reached its peak, Tammi suddenly clutched her head. She staggered, stumbled, and collapsed into Marvin's arms. The band stopped playing. The crowd froze. Witnesses later said the room felt colder, heavier, as if something sacred had just been lost. Tammi was rushed to a hospital in Philadelphia. Doctors delivered the diagnosis no one expected: a malignant brain tumor. She was only 23. The next 3 years were a slow, merciless decline. Tammi endured 8 brain surgeries. Her once vibrant body weakened. Her hair was shaved away. The radiant young woman fans adored faded into a fragile shadow. Yet while she lay confined to hospital beds, Motown continued releasing her old recordings. Album covers still showed her smiling. The illusion was carefully preserved. Insiders later claimed Berry Gordy forbade anyone from speaking publicly about her condition. Motown can't have tragedy, they were told. A nurse later shared a chilling memory. In late 1969, during one brief moment of consciousness, Tammi squeezed her hand, smiled faintly, and whispered, "I just want to sing again, not for them, for me." It was the last clear sentence she ever spoke. Marvin Gaye visited often. He sang their songs softly at her bedside, convinced his voice might bring her back. He believed in miracles, but none came. On March 6, 1970, Tammi Terrell died at the University of Pennsylvania Hospital. She was 24. Her funeral took place on a cold Philadelphia morning. A white coffin covered in roses stood at the front of the church. Marvin sang goodbye, but his voice broke before the final note. Tears fell onto the coffin lid. Afterward, Motown said almost nothing. No tribute, no acknowledgement. Even her medical records seemed to disappear. Tammy's death left Motown shaken. A young woman full of light had collapsed under the spotlight and vanished in silence. Some called it fate. Others whispered darker things, that Motown consumed its own, and that no one ever left whole. Marvin withdrew from music for nearly 2 years, haunted by her absence, often saying Tammi still sang to him in his dreams. And so, in many minds, Tammi Terrell became the first fallen angel of Motown, her silenced voice marking the beginning of a long, uneasy shadow over its brightest era. Florence Ballard. Florence Ballard, the voice erased from Motown's heaven. 6 years after Tammi Terrell's death, Detroit witnessed another tragedy. There were no stage lights, no applause, no farewell performance, only poverty, silence, and the slow-burning bitterness of a dream that had been stripped away. Florence Ballard was not merely a member of the Supremes, she was their beginning. In 1959, long before Motown became a global powerhouse, Florence joined Mary Wilson and Diana Ross to form the Primettes. They were teenage girls singing in cramped Detroit clubs, talent shows, and borrowed stages wherever anyone would listen. From the start, Florence stood out. Her voice was deep, commanding, and filled with emotion. Many believed she would be the star, the one destined to lead black women into a bold new future. But when the group entered Motown's carefully engineered system, talent alone was no longer enough. Berry Gordy didn't just hear voices, he saw images, formulas, and control. As Motown grew, Diana Ross, with her soft features and Hollywood-ready smile, became his focus. Florence, whose power lived in her sound rather than her appearance, slowly slipped from the center. When the Primettes became the Supremes, the balance shifted. From 1964 to 1966, the group conquered America. They topped charts, sang at the White House, appeared constantly on television, and sold millions of records. To the public, they were flawless. Behind the curtain, Florence was being erased. In photographs, she was placed in the background. In recordings, her vocals were reduced or removed. The woman who had anchored the group was quietly rewritten as secondary. The rejection cut deeply. Florence began drinking, her behavior growing unpredictable as resentment and humiliation consumed her. Motown labeled her unstable and difficult. That label made everything easier. By the summer of 1967, Florence Ballard was gone. There was no press conference, no goodbye tour, no acknowledgement of her role in creating the group. Just a small payout and an unspoken agreement to disappear. Diana Ross was crowned Motown's queen. Florence was erased from the narrative. Still, she believed she could return. In 1968, Florence signed a solo deal with ABC Records and released It Doesn't Matter How I Look. The title sounded defiant, almost wounded, but radio stations tied to Motown's influence refused to play it. The industry doors stayed closed. The record failed. The press ignored her. Around Detroit, people whispered about an invisible wall. Once you left Motown, you were finished. By the early 1970s, Florence's life had collapsed into poverty. She lived with her 3 daughters in a small, cold apartment on Buena Vista Street. To survive, she worked janitorial jobs and odd shifts wherever she could. Sometimes she sang in tiny local bars for a few dollars. Her apartment walls were covered with old photographs, 3 young women holding hands under bright stage lights frozen in happier times. Neighbors later said they often heard Florence humming late at night, "Stop, in the name of love." Her voice was rough now, strained by years of pain, but still unmistakable. Then the rumors began. Some claimed Florence kept a small notebook, later called the Motown Diary. According to close friends, it contained secrets never meant to be public, exploitative contracts, Berry Gordy's affairs with female artists, and quiet meetings between powerful financiers and the black music empire. One friend recalled Florence whispering days before her death, "If I ever tell them what I know, they'll never let me live." In February 1976, Florence appeared in a rare local television interview. She looked exhausted but managed a faint smile. Her voice was soft, almost distant. She spoke about wanting to return to the stage, not for fame but to sing for her children. Many believe she was preparing something new, perhaps a memoir or a final truth. That future never came. In the early hours of February 22, 1976, Florence Ballard was rushed to Detroit Receiving Hospital in cardiac arrest. Doctors tried to revive her, but she was pronounced dead at 3 a.m. She was only 32 years old. In her purse, authorities found a few coins and an old photograph. 3 young girls holding hands beneath stage lights. The notebook was never found. Her funeral was small and quiet. No Motown executives attended, no flowers from Berry Gordy, no condolences from Diana Ross. Only Mary Wilson stood beside the casket, holding Florence's hand one last time. As the coffin was lowered, witnesses said a cold wind swept through the cemetery, carrying a sound that felt unfinished. After her death, Detroit newspapers wrote, "Florence Ballard died of poverty." Those who knew her whispered another truth: she died because she dared to leave Motown. If Tammi Terrell was the star who fell in the light, Florence Ballard was the voice suffocated in the dark. One was taken by illness, the other by despair. From that moment on, many believed the Motown curse was real, an echo of voices never allowed to finish their song. David Ruffin, the voice that fell from heaven. After Tammi Terrell's death, those close to David Ruffin said he never truly sang the same again. Her passing left a dark mark on his spirit, part grief, part invisible sentence he could not escape. Once the brightest star of the Temptations, Ruffin slowly spiraled downward, rejected, erased, and eventually found dead under circumstances that sent a chill through Detroit's music world. David Ruffin had been the voice that made America fall in love. When he sang "My Girl," it felt as though Motown itself breathed through him. His voice was smooth, aching, and unforgettable, the sound of romance, hope, and soul. On stage, he was magnetic, but behind the spotlight lived another man, arrogant, unstable, addicted, and burdened by secrets he never fully shared. By 1968, at the height of the Temptations' fame, Berry Gordy made a brutal decision. Ruffin was fired from the group. Officially, he was too difficult to control. Unofficially, many believed he had become dangerous, too volatile, too outspoken, too hard to manage. From that moment, his name quietly vanished from Motown's carefully polished history. According to those who knew him, that was when the curse began to follow. Without the stage, Ruffin drifted. He moved between Las Vegas and Philadelphia, performing in dim clubs far removed from his glory days. He carried resentment like a wound, often telling friends, "They took everything from me." Drugs tightened their grip, and paranoia followed close behind. Yet beneath the chaos, Ruffin began to talk. By the 1980s, he was telling friends about what he claimed were Motown's darkest secrets: black money, connections to organized crime, and singers who were silenced after leaving the label. One close friend later recalled Ruffin saying he was writing a book that would expose everything. He laughed and said, "Don't worry, I'm about to tell the truth." A week later, he was dead. On June 1, 1991, Philadelphia police found David Ruffin's body inside a parked Mercedes on a dark street. The doors were locked. The windows were halfway down. Over $2,000 in cash was still in his pocket. Nothing was stolen. There were no visible injuries. Everything appeared strangely neat. The official report stated the cause of death was a cocaine overdose. But those close to Ruffin told a different story. Some claimed they saw him leave his hotel the night before with two unidentified men. A hospital worker later said Ruffin was still breathing when he arrived at the emergency room, yet no one took responsibility for his care. Soon after, his medical file was sealed. There was no investigation, no follow-up, just silence. Motown made no statement. Ruffin's funeral was held under heavy police presence. In a Detroit church, thousands stood motionless as his voice played one last time. "My Girl" echoed through the room, haunting and bittersweet. Behind the ceremony, rumors spread quickly. Journalists claimed Ruffin's memoir drafts vanished days after his death, along with his notebooks and typewriter. No one knew who took them. No one dared ask. As "My Girl" played, someone whispered, "He sang about love, but he died for the truth." From that night on, David Ruffin's voice became more than soul. It became a warning to anyone who dared to walk out through Motown's gates. Mary Wells, the queen who was silenced. When Mary Wells was found in her modest Los Angeles apartment, she could no longer speak. Throat cancer had stolen the one thing that defined her existence, the voice that once shook America. The official story said she passed away quietly, but those who knew her believed otherwise. They said it was not peace that took her, but the final chapter of a long punishment, a warning that stretched across decades, beginning the moment Mary Wells dared to walk away from Motown. Mary Wells was not just a singer, she was an era. She became the first black woman in modern music history to be embraced nationwide. When My Guy dominated the airwaves in 1964, Berry Gordy proudly crowned her Motown's first queen. Her voice was warm, confident, and unmistakable. She symbolized elegance, independence, and possibility at a time when black female artists were rarely allowed such space. Yet within months of that crowning moment, the throne was pulled from beneath her. The reason was simple and brutal: money. Mary had signed her first Motown contract at just 17 years old. She never had legal representation. She trusted the system. For years, hits like "Two Lovers," "You Beat Me to the Punch," and "My Guy" generated enormous profits for the label. Meanwhile, Mary received only modest payments, amounts that barely reflected her success. When she finally demanded a renegotiation, Berry Gordy refused. So Mary did the unthinkable. She left Motown and signed with 20th Century Fox Records, becoming the first major Motown star to break away. It was a move that shook the industry and sealed her fate. Almost overnight, Mary vanished from radio. DJs received quiet warnings not to play her music. Interviews were canceled without explanation. Magazines stopped returning calls. Doors that once opened effortlessly slammed shut all at once. Years later, Mary would say, "They didn't kill me. They made me die slowly." After leaving Motown, Mary survived through small performances and short-term contracts. She was still invited to sing, but only as a nostalgic reminder of Motown's golden past. The industry had moved on without her. For years, Mary tried to sue Motown for unpaid royalties. Each time, her efforts collapsed. Lawyers mysteriously withdrew mid-case. Meetings were canceled without notice. A close friend later revealed that Mary kept a small box containing her original contract and old payment slips. Documents she believed proved everything. She once told him, "If anything happens to me, look in there." After her death, the box vanished. By 1989, cancer entered her life. Medical bills drained what little she had left. Mary sold her jewelry to pay for treatment. As the disease progressed, she lost her voice entirely and communicated only by writing. A nurse later recalled that during her final nights, Mary repeatedly wrote a single phrase on her notepad: "They silenced me." Her family believed those words were not about illness, but about Motown. For years, Mary had felt watched. Every attempt to reach journalists or legal help ended abruptly, as if someone was always one step ahead. Mary Wells died on July 26, 1992, at the age of 49. The cause was listed simply as complications from cancer. What unsettled those close to her was timing. Just weeks earlier, her condition had been improving. Fans had raised money to support her treatment, and Mary planned to move to Arizona for specialized therapy. Then, within 3 days, her health collapsed. When she was rushed to the hospital, she could no longer breathe. Later, her medical records from those final hours went missing. Her funeral was small and almost eerily quiet. No representatives from Motown attended. No flowers from Berry Gordy. Only a handful of friends and loyal fans stood around the casket, softly singing "My Guy" through tears. Some claimed Gordy had sent people to quietly observe the ceremony, ensuring no one publicly mentioned the label. After her death, a journalist revealed Mary had been preparing a memoir titled "What They Never Told Me" at Motown. The manuscript was never found. 1 month later, her editor's office was broken into, and the only item taken was Mary Wells's file. Her story ended like so many others connected to Motown, suddenly surrounded by unanswered questions and met with silence. No denial, no tribute, just absence, as if Mary Wells had never existed. Yet every time "My Guy" plays, those who remember her say the voice carries a sadness that never faded. Perhaps Mary Wells didn't die only from cancer, but from a system that slowly suffocated her until her very last breath. Paul Williams. Then came the quietest tragedy of all, the death of Paul Williams, the soul left behind. There were no stage lights, no roaring crowds, no final curtain call, only a man slipping into silence, carrying secrets that may have made him dangerous. When the news reached Detroit, the city felt it deeply. Officials called it suicide. Few truly believed that story. Paul Williams was not just a member of the Temptations, he was their backbone, a founding force. Long before fame arrived, Paul helped shape the group's identity. He wrote early material, choreographed their signature moves, and taught the others how to stand, bow, and command a stage. He wasn't the lead singer, but he was the one everyone respected. When Motown signed the Temptations in 1961, Paul became the bridge between raw talent and Berry Gordy's rigid system. But in Motown, balance never lasted. As the label grew into an empire, the spotlight narrowed. David Ruffin was pushed forward. Then Eddie Kendricks, Paul once central to everything, slowly faded from view. His vocals were reduced. His influence weakened. Creative control slipped from his hands. The man who helped build the foundation was quietly pushed into the shadows. Friends later recalled that when Paul drank, he would grow distant, staring into space. One sentence haunted those moments. "We created the soul of Motown," he would say, "but Motown is stealing the soul from us." By the early 1970s, his life was unraveling. Years of heavy drinking damaged his liver. His health declined. His marriage collapsed. His children drifted away. Yet even as his body failed, his determination remained. Paul believed Motown had never paid fair royalties to its founding artists. Quietly, he began preparing a legal challenge. He hired a lawyer, he gathered documents. He told close friends that if the case went forward, it would expose what Motown truly was behind the glamour. Just days before the lawsuit was set to be filed, Paul Williams was dead. On the night of August 17, 1973, he was found in the parking lot behind Detroit's 20 Grand Club, the same place where he had once performed in his prime. He sat slumped behind the wheel of his Cadillac with a gunshot wound to the temple. Police immediately ruled it a suicide, but the details raised questions. The gun had no fingerprints. The shell casing lay too far away to match a self-inflicted shot. Witnesses claimed the car doors were locked from the outside. Paul's family rejected the ruling. A close friend later revealed that just 2 days earlier, Paul had said, "If this works, people will finally know what Motown really is." Then the case was abruptly closed. No deep investigation, no follow-up. Only brief headlines buried in newspapers. Paul Williams, former Temptation, dead by suicide. At his funeral, his former bandmate stood silently before a simple wooden casket. Candlelight flickered against an old photograph. 5 young men in matching suits smiling wide, Paul standing proudly in the center, eyes alive with promise. No one mentioned the lawsuit. No one spoke about the gun. Years later, the legal documents Paul had been preparing vanished. The lawyer who worked with him left Detroit and could not be reached. Soon after Paul's death, Motown quietly changed its internal policies, terminating all legacy royalty disputes. Detroit still remembers Paul Williams as the man who carried the Temptations' soul. But those who knew him whispered that he had touched numbers, contracts, and secrets he was never meant to see. They said he ended his own life. But the evidence tells another story. They said it was suicide. But perhaps it was silence by force. And when that single gunshot echoed through an empty parking lot, something sacred disappeared. To this day, when My Girl plays on Detroit radio, some listeners still shiver, because they know the man who once held that soul is gone. And with him, perhaps, the truth is gone too. Marvin Gaye. Then there was Marvin Gaye, the man who believed the curse never let go. If Tammi Terrell marked the beginning of that darkness, Marvin was the one who carried it to its tragic end. After Tammy's death in 1970, something inside Marvin fractured. The joy never fully returned. He withdrew from the world, living in near isolation, haunted by vivid dreams. Friends recalled him waking in the night, convinced he could still hear Tammy singing. "She hasn't gone," he would whisper. "She just moved inside me." Once known as Motown's angel, Marvin slowly became its most dangerous rebel. He publicly challenged Berry Gordy, accusing the label of draining its artists while profiting from their pain. Out of that turmoil came What's Going On, an album born from inner warfare, equal parts prayer, protest, and confession. But the more Marvin fought for freedom, the more alone he became. By 1981, he severed ties with Motown completely. He carried with him the ghosts of those already lost: Tammy, Paul Williams, Florence Ballard, David Ruffin, and a growing fear that he would be next. In his final years, Marvin disappeared into Europe, numbing himself with smoke and spiraling hallucinations. Friends said he believed he was being watched, convinced that Motown never allowed anyone to leave untouched. When he finally returned to America, he moved back in with his parents, consumed by paranoia, fear, and unresolved pain. On April 1, 1984, just 1 day before his 45th birthday, Marvin Gaye was shot and killed by his own father during a heated argument. His death sealed the final chapter of Motown's darkest era. Angel, rebel, haunted soul. They say rain poured heavily over Detroit that night, and inside the old Hitsville studio, some swear a microphone crackled to life, releasing a faint, ghost-like melody, as if Tammy and Marvin were singing together one last time, finally free from the curse that bound them both. Eddie Kendricks. Then came Eddie Kendricks, the man who didn't collapse in scandal or violence, but slowly faded away in exhaustion. What made it more unsettling was the timing. His voice went silent in the same year Detroit was already drowning in grief. One by one, the names that once defined Motown were disappearing, and each time the same uneasy question returned: was this really just coincidence? Eddie Kendricks was the angelic falsetto of the Temptations. His voice was light as silk, so delicate that audiences instinctively held their breath when he climbed into those high notes. In Just My Imagination and The Way You Do the Things You Do, Eddie gave soul music its romance and tenderness, blending gospel grace with quiet sorrow. His sound carried vulnerability, the voice of a man who understood how unfair the world could be. Yet behind his gentle smile, Eddie had seen things he was never allowed to speak about. By the late 1960s, even as Motown reached its golden age, cracks were spreading within the Temptations. David Ruffin had been fired. Paul Williams was gone. What remained was a group increasingly treated as a polished product rather than artists. Eddie grew troubled by the lack of transparency. He questioned how profits were divided. He asked to see the books. "Why do we sing?" he demanded privately. While others grow rich, Berry Gordy refused. In 1971, Eddie Kendricks left the group, believing he had chosen freedom. He did not yet realize that leaving Motown never truly meant escape. In the years that followed, Eddie tried to rebuild as a solo artist. He recorded new music. He toured relentlessly, but his songs slowly vanished from radio rotation, a silence many former Motown artists understood too well. Then, in 1979, everything collapsed. The IRS seized his properties for unpaid taxes. Eddie was stunned. His finances had been handled by an accountant introduced through a former Motown employee. Even more disturbing, key tax files later disappeared from court records. His Birmingham home was repossessed. Eddie was left financially broken and deeply confused. Still, he sang, even as exhaustion consumed him, even as lung cancer began to destroy his body. Night after night, he stood on stage, one hand pressed against his chest, forcing that fragile falsetto through pain. In one of his final interviews, Eddie delivered a line that shocked the press. "Motown is a velvet prison. It's beautiful. It glitters. But once you're inside, no one leaves whole." After his final concert in 1991, Eddie confided in a close friend that he felt watched. He spoke of black cars parked near his home, strange men appearing repeatedly at his shows, and a letter that arrived already opened. He believed someone was making sure he would never reveal everything he knew. In October 1992, Eddie Kendricks died in Birmingham, Alabama, after a short battle with lung cancer. The cause was listed as peaceful, but many questioned the timing. Just before his death, Eddie had been preparing a memoir titled Behind the Temptation, intended to expose Motown's control over artists' contracts and money. The manuscript was never published. No one has ever seen it. Thousands attended his funeral. When Berry Gordy and Diana Ross entered, the atmosphere shifted. Boos erupted. Someone shouted, "You killed him." A witness later said Gordy turned pale while Ross lowered her head and quickly left. No representative from Motown spoke. No official statement was released. After the funeral, a close friend revealed that Eddie had once handed him a sealed envelope, saying, "If I die early, open this." Before it could be opened, the friend's apartment was broken into. The safe was emptied. Everything inside vanished. That year, Detroit lost another child. Mary Wells died in poverty. Eddie Kendricks died surrounded by unanswered questions. Two stars of Motown's first generation faded in the same year, 1992, and with them, an entire era quietly ended. Yet inside the old studios of Hitsville, some say the microphones still pick up something late at night, a thin, high voice drifting through empty rooms. Fragile, sweet, unfinished. They say it's Eddie Kendricks, the last falsetto of soul still singing, reminding the world that the truth was never fully sung. Shorty Long. Then there was Shorty Long, the man who vanished into the water, sealing the final chapter of the Motown curse. If the deaths before still left room for doubt, Shorty's end erased it completely. No cancer, no overdose, no suicide note. Just a quiet night, a fishing trip, and a body swallowed by the Detroit River, where city lights shimmered like unblinking eyes. Shorty Long never fit the image of a Motown star. He wasn't glamorous, he wasn't polished, but musically, he was a giant. He was the first artist at Motown to truly do it all, writing, arranging, and recording his own material. At a time when most performers were simply voices handed songs, Shorty was a full musician. He wrote Devil with the Blue Dress On and Function at the Junction, tracks that helped shape soul funk itself, the very sound later celebrated in the work of Stevie Wonder and Marvin Gaye. Yet while his music lived on, his name remained buried. Berry Gordy reportedly dismissed him as too eccentric, too independent, too difficult to control. As Motown rose into an empire, Shorty grew increasingly outspoken. In closed-door meetings, he questioned why artists like Diana Ross, Smokey Robinson, and Marvin Gaye received constant promotion while others were sidelined. He challenged the system openly. Friends recalled him once shouting, "If I can't be heard here, I'll take my music somewhere else." Inside Motown, those words carried weight. Leaving was not just betrayal, it was unforgivable. On the night of June 29, 1969, Shorty Long left his Detroit home with a friend, telling neighbors they were going fishing. The sky was calm. The river was quiet. There were no storm warnings. By morning, their small boat was found drifting near Belle Isle, overturned, empty. 2 days later, Shorty's body surfaced miles downstream. Investigators noted bruises on his forehead and shoulders, marks that looked less like an accident and more like a struggle. Still, the official police report offered a single sentence: accidental drowning due to loss of balance. Nothing about it made sense. Witnesses at the dock later claimed they heard raised voices and arguing before the boat departed. Shorty's family insisted he couldn't swim and never fished at night. They demanded a new investigation. The case file was forwarded to Detroit Police Headquarters and then vanished. Only one partial copy survived, kept by his widow. Scrawled across it were the words, "No evidence of foul play." Shorty Long's funeral was held on July 8, 1969. It was small, quiet. Not a single representative from Motown attended. Berry Gordy sent no flowers, made no statement, offered no condolences. Even more unsettling, local radio stations abruptly stopped playing Shorty's music. For a Motown artist, the silence was deafening. Friends later admitted they felt afraid, as if something unseen had settled over them all. Weeks before his death, during a late recording session, Shorty had reportedly said, "At Motown, my voice belongs to them, and so does my silence." Around that time, he recorded a test track titled "Ain't No Justice." After his death, the recording vanished from Motown's archives. It has never been recovered. They say Shorty Long died in the water, but those who knew him believe he had already been killed by erasure, by imposed silence, by the despair of a man who knew too much and was forbidden to speak. And when the Detroit River closed over his body, the city seemed to understand. The Motown curse didn't just take lives, it took voices, and after Shorty Long, no one dared speak again. 8 names, 8 stories that still send chills through music history. Whether you see these events as coincidence, tragedy, or something far more unsettling, one thing is certain: the legacy of Motown is layered with brilliance and unanswered questions. Behind the timeless songs lie human lives marked by ambition, resistance, and consequences that still spark debate decades later. So now the question is yours. Do you believe there was truly a curse, or was it simply the dark cost of power, control, and fame colliding? Share your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your perspective. And if stories like this keep you thinking long after the music fades, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. More untold histories, hidden truths, and haunting legends are coming next. Stay with us.